Here's my plan to tackle that topic. Let me know if you need to make changes.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a phrase that honestly sounds like a spell from a fantasy novel, but is actually a real nightmare in family law. Ultravires. It translates to acting beyond powers.
Yeah, and in the context of our source material today, it is definitely not abstract. We're looking at a specific legal report regarding an Indiana parenting coordinator, Robin Brown Niehaus. The core allegation here is that she took the authority granted to her by a court and basically stretched it until it broke.
Right, and let's clarify what a parenting coordinator or PC actually is first. Reading through the Indiana Parenting Time guidelines, they sound like referees for high conflict divorces, people who step in when parents just cannot agree on a schedule.
They are referees, but with a very specific leash. I mean, their authority is strictly derivative. It does not come from them. It flows directly from the judge's order. They are appointed to help you follow the rules, not to write new ones.
Which brings us to the specific incident in the report. It alleges Niehaus unilaterally removed a step called discussion and mediation from the dispute resolution process. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. If these parents are already in high conflict, isn't cutting out the discussion part just efficiency? Why is that such a massive constitutional issue?
Because efficiency cannot trump due process. The report argues that by removing discussion and mediation, the PC stripped the parents of self-determination. In family law, you have a fundamental right to try to resolve disputes yourself first.
So it is like a referee at a football game just canceling halftime. You cannot just change the structure of the game because you want it to move faster.
Exactly. The PC shifted the dynamic from collaborative, where parents have a voice, to authoritative, where she simply dictates. The source calls this a jurisdictional encroachment. A PC can clarify logistics, like changing a pickup from 5 to 5:15, but they cannot materially alter how disputes are actually resolved.
That is a crucial distinction. Logistics versus process. Now, the report suggests this overreach is even more concerning because of the history involved. The source digs into public records from 1988 in the matter of Robin L. Brown.
And this is not just a bad review. This was an Indiana Supreme Court finding that resulted in a 1-year suspension of her law license. The language the court used was incredibly sharp. They found conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation.
Wow, that is a heavy label for anyone in the legal system. But why is a case from nearly 40 years ago relevant to a parenting coordinator today?
Because of immunity. PCs enjoy quasi-judicial immunity. You basically cannot sue them for bad decisions because they are supposed to be neutral extensions of the court. That shield is predicated on the assumption of absolute integrity.
So the argument is that the shield should not apply here.
Right. The report argues that you have a demonstrated bias. You have a historic finding of fraud combined with a current allegation of breaking court rules to impose authority.
It suggests the system is protecting someone who might be unprotectable. So for you listening and looking at this data, what is the actual recourse? The report lists some specific motions, right?
Yes, 2 distinct moves. First, a motion to terminate the appointment, which argues the PC exceeded their mandate. Second, a motion to set aside. This asks the judge to throw out any orders the PC made after she removed the mediation step.
Because if she broke the rules to make those decisions, the decisions themselves should not stand.
It is about resetting the playing field. And it leaves us with a difficult question. The parenting coordinator is hired to be the neutral solution to a conflict.
But if the solution goes rogue?
Exactly. If the person hired to manage the conflict ignores the boundaries of the court, do they become a bigger liability than the fighting parents ever were?
That is the thought for you to chew on today. Thanks for joining this deep dive. You know how we generally assume that a court order is the final word? Like, if a judge signs a piece of paper, that's just game over.
Right, yeah. You assume there's a certain level of infallibility there.
Exactly. Well, today we're looking at a scenario that flips that assumption completely on its head. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are analyzing a really dense legal review of Indiana custody law.
And specifically, we're looking at what happens when an order is so flawed that police are actually weaponized to enforce it against a protective parent.
Yeah, it's wild. The source material covers Indiana Trial Rule 35, how courts sometimes disregard severe domestic violence evidence like strangulation and the emergency remedies you can use.
Right, and our mission here isn't just to gawk at a broken system. We really want to unpack the strategy for you. The goal is to show how these procedural flaws in forensic evaluations get weaponized and the specific legal maneuvers you can use to fight back.
Maneuvers like the defensive impossibility, right?
Exactly. It's basically a high-stakes roadmap.
So let's start with the most volatile element in this review, which is the police. I mean, I think most of you listening probably assume police don't get involved in civil custody disputes. That's a civil matter.
Right, generally yes. In Indiana and really most jurisdictions, police authority is usually limited to just keeping the peace.
Just keeping the peace, yeah.
Yeah. They aren't enforcement agents for civil contracts. So unless they have a specific writ of assistance, which is a direct command from a judge to seize a person or property, they technically shouldn't be physically removing a child.
But the analysis points out that they actually do. And when they do it without that writ, it creates this intense atmosphere of instability and coercion. It looks less like a transfer and more like an abduction.
That is the critical distinction. But here's a counterintuitive pivot in the legal strategy the author lays out. That traumatic police intervention actually generates the exact objective evidence you need.
Evidence for what? Like, to stop it?
Yes, to file an emergency motion to stay judgment under Trial Rule 62 and Appellate Rule 39.
Oh, I see. Because you have to prove irreparable harm to hit pause on the custody change.
Exactly. The argument is that the attempted abduction itself, the trauma of that police-enforced removal, is the objective proof of irreparable harm.
So the system's overreach literally hands you the jurisdictional hook for an emergency appellate remedy. That is fascinating. But let's trace it back a bit. How does a judge even sign a bad order like that to begin with?
The material points straight to the forensic evaluation. That's ground zero.
And that brings us to Indiana Trial Rule 35, right? The scope creep problem.
Yes. Trial Rule 35 governs mental or physical exams. And a valid order needs good cause and has to be incredibly specific. It must define the time, place, and specifically the scope.
But courts often issue these really vague orders instead.
Right. And a vague order lets the evaluator go fishing. Or worse, it allows them to completely ignore documented evidence of domestic violence, like police reports of rape and strangulation, and instead pathologize the victim's trauma response.
So instead of saying this parent is terrified because they were strangled, the report says, oh, this parent is anxious and alienating.
Precisely. But the procedural attack here is that if the evaluator failed to provide raw data or operated under a vague scope, the report is defective. You can move to strike it entirely.
And if that report is struck, you pull the foundation right out from under the adverse custody order.
Right. Which shifts us to the judge's error. Indiana Code 3117-28